Hello viewer! In this episode of International Talks we are going to discuss politics of Russia. In previous episodes we were discussing the economy of Russia. If you haven't seen this episode, click the link in the description box and watch it. Now, the purpose of discussing the politics of Russian Federation is because to understand it, that it is not only beers, vodka and borscht, which is a Ukrainian dish, by the way, even though some say that it's not. And it's a totally different country from Ukraine, even though some people say that it is the same. In order to understand the Russian politics, we need to look at the power balance between the government and opposition. By opposition, I mean any citizen or politician or organization and their ability to influence the political agenda. Where you can express yourselves. There are four places that come to mind: television, printing press, social media and street demonstrations. And kitchen, but we excluded that one because the data on that one is unreliable. Let's talk about the television. Since the beginning of the presidency of Vladimir Putin, there were two main televisions which were the most popular in Russia: ORT and NTV. And the government gradually started to usurp the power. Up next was television. When Putin came to power, only three networks had the national reach to really count in politics: ORT, RTR and NTV. By running Berezovsky out of town, Putin effectively acquired control of ORT, the channel with the biggest national audience. RTR is still 100% owned by the state, so it was even easier to tame. Controlling the third channel, NTV, proved more difficult since it was in private hands. But the anarchy of the early 90s gave Putin and his lieutenants a treasure trove of compromising material on anyone who did business back then. In 2000s, federal authorities filed charges against NTV's principal owner, Vladimir Gusinsky, who eventually lost his property and now shuttles between Spain, the United States and Israel, never Russia. NTV's origin team of journalists tried to make a go of it at two other stations but eventually failed. Today, Kremlin has de facto control over all the national television in Russia. If Gusinsky lives abroad nowadays, the fate of Berezovsky is more tragic. The state-owned Gazprom Media owns almost all the channels and online media outlets in Russia. If you want to hear the critical news, Novaya Gazeta and Ekho Moskvy are the only sources available. It is very hard to be an investigative journalist in Russia. Since 1992, 58 journalists were killed, 7 were imprisoned and 7 are missing. During the Putin's tenure, 30 journalists were killed, including Anna Politkovskaya, who was murdered in 2006 in the elevator of her apartment block. Even though 5 men were jailed for her assassination, the mastermind of the murder is still free. As you can see, the investigative journalists are persecuted. However, the state-controlled media enjoys the luxury budget increase every year despite the pandemic. Generally, Russia is rated as not free by Freedom House because the Kremlin orchestrates the multi-party system and targets the opposition leaders. The most famous case is Boris Nemtsov, who was killed in 2015 near Kremlin. Even though 5 Chechen men were jailed for his murdering, as in case with Anna Politkovskaya, the mastermind of the case is free. Alexei Navalny, the current leader of the opposition, on August 20th last year was also poisoned. As in the report of the organization prohibiting chemical weapons, he was poisoned by the chemical weapon Novichok. Luckily, after getting medical treatment in Germany, the Charité clinic in Berlin, he returned to Russia. However, unluckily, he was arrested at the very same day at the very same airport. And he was jailed for 3.5 years for the same charges that European Court of Human Rights ruled on that the charges on fraud were inadmissible. The internet and free speech is also targeted. New laws and regulations adopted in the past 2 years expanded the authorities' already significant capacity to filter and block internet content automatically, no longer depending on providers' cooperation to implement the block. The 2019 Sovereign Internet Law requires internet service providers to install equipment that allows authorities to circumvent providers and automatically block content. The government has banned the reroute internet traffic themselves. In 2018, a law introduces fines for search engines providing access to proxy services such as VPN that allows a user access to banned content or provide instructions for gaining access to such content. Regulations adopted in 2019 require VPNs and search engine operators to promptly block access to the websites on the list maintained by the federal government's informational system, which includes a regularly updated list of officially banned sites. Protests and street demonstrations are the most important and hot topics of the political agenda. Last decade launched with the biggest protest of the modern Russia. In 2011, people rallied the streets against the results of the parliamentary elections. In 2012, however, they rallied against the inauguration of Vladimir Putin. Bolotnaya Ploshchad, or the Bolotnaya Square, is one of the most well-known square where the peaceful protests were punished by the 13,000 police officers who orchestrated the crackdown on the people and the scuffles that were orchestrated by the Ministry of Interior. Nearly 30 defendants are accused of orchestrating and participating in a mass riot, but in reality they were drawn into what amounted to little more than a scuffle with the police that the officers themselves had planned and provoked. Fortunately, the accused will not be executed as their counterparts were in the 1930s, but under President Vladimir Putin, even participation in a peaceful demonstration can lead to a lengthy term. Since 2014, the government restricted the protest laws. A solitary violation of the law, for example, peacefully gathering without the authorities' expression prior permission, is punishable by a fine or up to 15 days administrative detention. 3 such violations result in a criminal offense punishable by up to 5 years imprisonment. After Alexei Navalny was arrested and jailed, his supporters launched a mass protest. Over 5,000 people were arrested during the peaceful protest. And there are so many people arrested that penitentiary system could not distribute all of them effectively. Protests across the country are different. Since the territory of the Russian Federation is huge, the government approaches to different cries or autonomic republics differently. In summer of 2020, when the governor of the Khabarovsk Krai, Sergei Furgal, was charged for murder and jailed, his supporters rallied the streets. And even though Khabarovsk is a small city of 600,000 people, tens of thousands of people rallied in support of their governor. And the local authorities and central authorities don't even dare to touch the protests. Up until the winter, after almost 6 months of protests, when the number of protesters dwindled, only after that the government dared to arrest the remnants of the protesters. Last but not least, after the plebiscite or referendum, as they call it, for the constitutional changes, the new amendments almost guarantee the remaining president to be in power up until 2036. In conclusion, it is clear that Russia is an autocratic state which controls the opposition, internet and media by the central apparatus and the Ministry of Interior. However, for how long the remaining government will be able to control the situation is unknown. But despite everything, I will keep you updated on the subject. Thank you for watching. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and if you haven't seen other videos, for example previous video on the economy of Russia, watch it. So until next time.